This tutorial will show you how to set up a one-page portfolio website. There is no coding experience required. It is expected that you've already set up a GitHub account and gotten a domain name with the Student Developer Pack from GitHub and Namecheap. If you haven't done this, make sure you watch the previous video linked in the description. To get started, we need something to edit code with. I recommend using Visual Studio Code. You can get this free program from Microsoft. Just type in Visual Studio Code into a web browser and then download the version for your operating system. Once it's installed, we can open up Visual Studio Code. The first time you open up Visual Studio Code, you'll receive this welcome screen. You can choose the theme that you want. You can choose different settings that you want to have, and then finish out the welcome screen. Then we'll have this standard start screen for Visual Studio Code. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we have Git installed on our system. To do that, go up to the top of your screen where it says Terminal and start a new terminal. Down in the bottom of the terminal window, we want to type in git, G-I-T, -- version. If it says there's a Git version, you're good to go. If there is no Git version listed here, then you need to install Git first. If you're on a Macintosh computer and you see this dialog pop up telling you to install the Xcode developer tools after running the git command, just click OK and follow the instructions. To install Git, go to a browser, and then you can type in git-scm.com. Go to the download section, and then download and install the version for your operating system. It's available for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Once it's installed, go back to Visual Studio Code. Now that we have Git installed in Visual Studio Code, we need to clone our existing repository. In the top left of Visual Studio Code, you'll see Files, Search, Source Control, Run and Debug, and Extensions. Make sure you have the file icon clicked, and then we're going to clone a repository. It will ask if we want to clone from GitHub. We want to clone from GitHub, so click Clone from GitHub. Then we need to allow GitHub to sign in. This will take us to a web browser. Once here, click Continue. If you're not signed in, you'll need to sign in to the web browser. Once you're signed in, it's a good idea to select this checkbox and then open Visual Studio Code. Here you can also click this checkbox to Don't Ask Again and click Open. Up at the top now, we'll have options of which repository we want to choose. We want to choose the one we set up in last video, so it should be your username.github.io. You may have other repositories, but this is the one we want to clone now, so select this one. Then it asks us where we want to clone our repository. Basically, where do we want to save it? This is up to you. I'm going to save mine in my Documents folder. Then at the bottom of the screen, it asks us if we want to open the repository. I'm going to click Open. Also, we need to say, yes, I trust the authors. Now, if we look at the top, we'll see the same files that we have in our GitHub repository. To double check that, let's go to GitHub in our browser. So here I'm going to type in github.com. From my profile, I'll click on this repository, and you'll see that I have the same files. I have a CNAME file, a README, and an index.html. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So now we have the files in Visual Studio Code right here at the top, but we also have them in our operating system. If you click on Windows File Explorer or Macintosh Finder, then navigate to your Documents folder, you'll see a folder that is the name of your repository. If I go inside this folder, you'll see that I have my files. Watch what happens if I make a new folder in this folder. I'm going to right-click New Folder, and I'm going to name this folder IMG. Then, if I go to Visual Studio Code, you'll see that I have IMG here as well. But if I go to GitHub, you'll notice that IMG is not here. Now we know that if we make a folder on our operating system, it will show up here in Visual Studio Code. We can also make folders in Visual Studio Code. For example, I'll click the new folder icon at the top, and I'm going to name this folder CSS. Then I'm going to make one more folder called JS. Let's go back into our Finder, and you'll see that I have 1, 2, 3 folders. Note that all the names are lowercase. In Visual Studio Code, let's double-click index.html. This should have the original message that you made in GitHub. I'm going to change this from Hello World to Hello World from my laptop. At the top here, you'll notice that there's a white button. That means we haven't saved this. So press Control S or Command S to save. There, it will go away. Now we have a notification badge on our source control. So let's click on source control. Here it says we've made some changes. We made changes to index.html. It will keep track of your changes just like Photoshop history. So we need to commit them, and then we have different versions of our file. So I'm going to say updated index. Then I'm going to click the checkbox right here. A dialog box will pop up. I recommend clicking always. Here we may get an error. It says make sure you configure your username and user email. If this is the first time that you've done this, this will probably happen. So I'm going to click cancel. To fix this, we need to go to terminal. So at the top, click terminal and then click new terminal. Here at the terminal, we're going to type in a couple commands. We're going to type git space config space -- global space user dot name space quote. Type your username, close quotes, then press enter. We also need to set up our email. So we'll set git config -- global user dot email space quote, then press enter. Now we have our username and email set up. I'm going to close the terminal window. So let's try this again. We're going to update the index, click the check mark. Now the changes have gone through and we no longer have a notification at source control. But if we go back to GitHub and we click on our index file, it still says the old information. How do we make it sync with our Visual Studio Code? Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. In the lower left of the screen, you'll notice that there's one with an up arrow. If I click this, it's going to tell me that I'm going to push from this file up to GitHub. I'm going to click OK. Then down at the bottom, it will say, would you like code to periodically run git fetch? Click yes. This way, it will sometimes pull down the changes if you make them on GitHub. So let's go back and check GitHub. If I refresh this page, you'll notice now this file says hello world from my laptop. Excellent. So now we have the files that are on our laptop syncing with the files on GitHub. Then if you go to your domain, you'll see these changes updated on your actual website. Now we're ready to get coding. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So now that we have Visual Studio Code and our remote Git repository and our website all syncing, we can get started coding. There are a few more things we need to set up before we really get into our web coding. If you look at my index.html, it has not changed, but I have a notification over here at source control. I'm going to click on that. Here it says .dsstore. If you're on a Macintosh, you will always have this file update when you browse the folder. We don't want to keep keeping track of this folder. So I'm going to click on Files. Then I'm going to click on a new file, and I'm going to label this file .gitignore. Inside gitignore, I'm going to type .ds_store, and then I'm going to save it. If I click on source control now, I can put in a commit message and say added gitignore. Now it should not keep track of those changes to the DS store. You can add any other files that you don't want to have synced in your Git file. Next, we need to install a couple extensions to Visual Studio Code to make our coding easier. To install extensions, we'll click on this icon in the lower left called Extensions. We're going to search extensions and we're going to type in live, and then live server should pop up. So we'll click install. This will allow us to view our website locally. Then we're going to type in prettier. We're going to install prettier. This will make our code look nice and format it automatically. Once we've installed prettier, we want to click on settings. Settings is in the lower left. Then click settings. Type in format. And here it says editor format on save. We want to make sure we check this box. That way it'll automatically format our code on save. You also have to select prettier as the code formatter because there is none selected by default. We can close this sidebar. Now we're ready to get coding. Right now, we have Hello World from my laptop. An internet browser will display this, but this really isn't a web page yet. We need some more items. So I'm going to delete everything on the first line. Then I'm going to type in the boilerplate for a website. Visual Studio Code has some shortcut functions, so I can just type exclamation point and then press enter, and it will give me this entire boilerplate of HTML without typing anything. Let's look at this for a second. Every HTML file has this at the top, doctype.html. Even YouTube right now has this as its first line of the page. Then this next line tells us what language we're in. Each of these are elements in HTML. We have opening element tags, which is this. This is called an opening tag because it's the first one. If we look on line 12, we have a closing tag. You know it's a closing tag because it has this slash in the front of it. Each of these tags are nested inside each other. Here we have the head tag. At the top of every HTML page, we have a head tag. This is the opening head tag. Then we have the closing head tag. Inside the head tag, we have children. We have a meta tag. This tells us that we're using the UTF-8 character set. This one here allows us to have responsive websites. This one here is the title. We can change this from document to my portfolio. This is what we'll see in the browser tab. So it's important to have a nice message there. Then in the body, I'm going to add new HTML tags. I'm going to add a P tag. So I want to type shift angle bracket P close angle bracket. Notice that Visual Studio Code has already added the closing tag. Now inside here, I can say hello world from my laptop. Now we have a complete web page. It will look exactly the same in the browser, but now we have all the pieces that we need to make a web page. Just because we have text on our website, we also want to be able to style it. Just like in a word processor, you can change the color of text and the size of text. We can do that on a web page too. And we do that with something called CSS, or cascading style sheets. There are many ways to add CSS to your document. We're going to do it with something called an external style sheet. That means we'll have a separate file that will have all our styles in it, and we'll link to that file from our HTML document. To make this file, click on the file icon in the top left. Here we're going to click on the new file icon, and we're going to type styles.css. Then press enter. Inside styles CSS, we'll have nothing there. That's okay. We're going to add things in just a bit. Now let's make sure this styles is connected to our index page. So click on the index tab. On the top line, on line 6, put your cursor, then press enter. Now we're going to type link and then press enter. This automatically types out this style sheet link. Here inside the quotes, we need to type css/styles.css because we're going to put our styles sheet in the CSS folder. But if we look over at our files layout, you'll notice that styles is not in the CSS folder. We can move it by dragging it to the CSS folder. And then we will say move. So now you can see styles is underneath the CSS folder. Before we do anything else, we want to make sure that our styles link is working. Here in the body on line 11, I have a paragraph tag. This is our hello world. So what I'm going to do is go to the styles, and I'm going to type P. This will style paragraphs. Then I'm going to put curly braces. Next, I'll type color, colon, red, semicolon, press Control or Command S to save. Then I'll also press Control or Command S to save my index file. Now I have information in my style sheet. This is telling all paragraphs to be red. In my index file, I have a paragraph and my style sheet. In the lower right-hand side of the page, you'll see a Go Live button. Click this button. This will launch a web browser and your page. It's important to note that this page is local to your laptop or desktop computer. You can tell this because you have your local IP address. But look, our paragraph is red. If we look at our website online, it's still black. Why is that? That's because we haven't synced our files to our web server on GitHub. Let's go ahead and do that. So first, notice on our source control, we have two notifications. I'm going to click that. It says we've made changes to index and styles. So for the message, I'm going to say added style sheet. Then I'm going to click the check mark. Now my changes are committed or saved on my local computer, but I still need to sync them with my GitHub. So down in the lower left-hand corner, I can click the sync button. And then I'm going to say, OK, don't show again. Now it will sync them with my remote GitHub repository. I can check this by going to my web browser. Here you can tell that I'm on the actual website. And then it'll take a couple seconds to update, maybe even a couple minutes. But once it's updated and you reload the page, now we can tell that our files are updated on the World Wide Web. Great. Now we can begin styling our page. If this is going to be a portfolio site, we probably want some images. Here is my repository on my local computer. You can tell that in the CSS folder, I have my style CSS. But in my image folder, I don't have anything. On my desktop, I prepared some images for my portfolio. So I'm going to take these images and put them in the other folder. So I'm going to make a new Finder window. You can do the same thing with Windows File Explorer. I'm going to shift-click all these JPEGs and then drag them into this image folder. Now I have these in the image folder. I also have a video here, but if I look over here, I don't have a video folder. So I'm going to right-click, make a new folder, and call this video. Then I'm going to drag my video to the video folder. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. You'll notice that we have lots of new notifications on source control. So for my message, I'm going to say added images. And then I'm going to click check. Now all my images are on my local repository and I can start using them in my project. Now we have everything set up to begin coding our web page. I'm going to be going over the basics of HTML and CSS, but if you're interested in learning more about it, I have more in-depth videos on both HTML and CSS. Both are linked in the description. We will be learning each new piece as we go. You may not know any HTML or CSS, but if you follow along, you will start to learn a lot just by doing it. So let's start. I'm going to delete this hello world from my laptop because that's not very exciting for a portfolio. What I really want to have in my portfolio is an image. So I'm going to type img and then I'm going to press enter. What this does is add all of these tags already. I could have typed manually open caret img space src equals 2 quotes alt equals 2 quotes close bracket, but it's much easier just to type img enter. So I'm going to do that one more time. img, then press enter. The source is where our image is. So if I look in the files, all my images are in the img folder. So for this one, I'm going to use ocean. So I'm going to type img, then slash, and I can select from this list so I don't have any typos, ocean. The alt tag is an alternative description of what you have there. It's important for screen readers and for accessibility in case the image doesn't show. So I'm going to type image of the ocean. Now I'm going to press Control S or Command S to save. I'm going to go back to my browser and look at my local site. Remember, this is the remote site, so this is what's online. Here, when I see the 127 at the beginning, this is my local site. And now you can see I have this image of the ocean. This is pretty cool. It's a little big, right? I can look over here and it's quite big, but now I have an image. This is a much better portfolio site already. Now we're going to make this image fit inside the screen because if you notice, if I make my browser window smaller, I can't see anything. And that's not good for being on a mobile device. And we're going to design everything for mobile first. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and we're going to go into our styles.css. We're going to add some basic styles that are very useful in most web coding projects in the beginning. One thing we can do in CSS is add a comment so we can remember what we're working on. To add a comment, you type slash, then a star, then I'm going to type basic styles. We need to end the comment by pressing star, then slash. Now I can go to a new line. HTML is the first tag in our HTML document. If you look here, we have HTML at the top. So that's what I'm targeting right now. Then I'm going to put curly braces, and I'm going to give it a font size of 100%. This will use the browser's default font size and then declare that our font size is 100% of that. We're going to type line height. Then we're going to type 1.5 rem. This is a relative unit that will say our line height is 1.5 of the font size. Next, we're going to type box sizing, border box. This is something that tells the browser how big the different elements of our web page are. Our web page can have the content, margin, padding, and border, and we're telling it count all that up as one dimension. Next, we're going to tell what font to use. We're going to say font family. Then we're going to say Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. Next, on the new line, we're going to say height 100%. Now we have our HTML basic styles. Next, we need to style the body. What is the body? Well, it's the next tag. So if you see here on line 10, we have the body. We're going to style everything inside the body. So we'll say body, then curly braces. Here we'll type margin, 0, auto. What this is going to do is give the margin on the top and bottom 0 and the left and right auto. This will center everything on the screen. Then we're going to set the padding to 0. So then there's no default padding. Then we're going to type in a dimension of min height, 100%. And we're going to type max width, 100%. Next is something that makes our box sizing work a little bit better. So we're going to type star, comma, then star, colon, colon, before, then comma, then star, colon, colon, after, then curly braces. And we're going to say box sizing, inherit. You don't need to understand what this is doing, but this is allowing the box sizing to work on all the elements properly. Cascading style sheets means all these styles cascade or fall down to the next place. So we're telling star everything else, just inherit the box sizing. And then we have one last basic style to add to our page. We're going to type img, and then we're going to say comma video. Then we're going to type curly brackets, and then we're going to say width 100%. Then we're going to say height auto. Then we'll say display block. If we save this, we now have our basic styles. So we styled the HTML, we styled the body, we made the box sizing work on all elements, and then we made our images and video responsive. Let's look at what these CSS declarations do. So first we have what are we targeting? These are actual HTML tags. Then curly braces. Then we have what property we are targeting, margin, padding. Then we have a colon, and then we have the value, and then a semicolon. This is the basic structure of CSS. Notice on line 23 and 24, I'm targeting two properties, two tags. So I'm saying image, comma, and video. Do the same thing to both of them. This is easier than typing this twice. Let's go ahead and look at our live server. So I'm going to go to the browser. Now you see that our image is fitting within the browser. If I make this smaller like a cell phone, I can still see 100% and it automatically resizes. We now have responsive images for our website. This is great. Let's go ahead and type up some more HTML to make this look a little bit better. Here we just have an image. What we're going to do is make a structure so we can have some text over the image. To do that, we're going to use some new HTML tags. First, I'm going to type header, then press enter. Notice it made the header opening and closing tags. You could type that manually, but it's faster just to type it and then press enter. I'm going to give this header a class. So I'm going to go inside the first caret, press space, then type class equals quote hero box. A class allows us to style this independently of other sections of the HTML. Then I'm going to go in between the opening and closing header tags and press enter. Now I'm going to type section and then press enter. Notice I have an opening and closing section tag. For the opening section tag, I'm going to give it a class equals hero image box. So what I'm going to do now is highlight all of the image, press Control or Command X to cut it, press my cursor right in between the opening and closing section tags, then press Control or Command V to paste. If I save that, then Prettier will format everything nicely. Now I basically have a header that has a class of hero box. I have a section that has a class of hero image box. And inside my section, I have an image. I want to take a little look here and notice how these are indenting. The way HTML works is everything is nested inside each other. So notice the body has the header nested inside it. Then the section is nested inside the header, and then the image is inside the section. We can do this all the way down as many times as we need. What I'm going to do is on line 14, in between the closing section and the closing header tag, I'm going to add a new section. So I'm going to type section, enter. Then I'm going to add a class to this section. I'm going to call this class equals hero text box. Then I'm going to press enter, and then inside the section, I'm going to add a heading. We can describe a heading by typing H1. This is the biggest heading, then press enter. I'm going to add a class to this heading. I'm going to call this class equals, quote, hero heading. Then I'm going to give some text for the hero heading. You see here in the title, the content of the title is in between the two tags. So I'm going to put in between the two heading tags, I'm going to type creativity like an ocean wave. So this will now be my heading. If I press Control or Command S to save, and then I go back to my web browser, you'll see I have a heading underneath my image. This is great. Let's continue to add more to our hero landing page. Now, underneath the heading, I'm going to add a paragraph. I'm going to type P, enter. Then I'm going to give this a class. I'm going to type space, class equals, quote, hero text. Inside the paragraph tag, I'm going to type more text. I'm going to say, surf on with Matona Authenton's creative projects. If I save this and go back to my browser, you'll see this on the bottom of the page. This looks great, but I want to have the text on top of the image. How can we do that? Well, we can do that with CSS. Because we gave the different elements in our HTML classes, we can target them specifically. So let's style them in the CSS. So go down to the bottom. We're going to add a new comment. Remember, press /*. We're going to type this hero styles. Then close the comment. To target a class, we press a period, then the name of the class, hero box, then curly braces. Remember, the hero box is right here. It's the header. So we're going to give it some styles. We're going to tell it to display grid. Then we're going to tell it how many columns it has in the grid. So we'll say grid template columns. Then we're going to say 1 FR. And FR is a fractional unit. So if we say 1 FR, we mean it only has one column and it's as big as the screen. Then we're going to tell it how many rows. We're going to say grid template rows. And then we're going to say 1 FR. So now it just has one column and one row. And then we're going to say grid gap. And we're going to say 0 pixels. So there's no gap in between the columns. Then we're going to align the content in the center. We're also going to justify the content in the center. Align content is up and down. Justify content is left and right. Then we're going to align the items at the start. And finally, we're going to give it a height of 100% and a width of 100%. Let's go back to our HTML. So we've coded up the styles for hero box. Now we need to style hero image box. That's the next thing. So let's do that in our CSS. So underneath hero box, I'm going to type hero image box, curly braces. We move this up to the top of the screen. Here, we're going to type height, and instead of 100%, we're going to type 100 VH. VH is the viewport height. So if it's a cell phone or a laptop or a desktop, it's just going to say how big is the window and then make our image box that height. Then we're going to say the width will be 100%. So make it as wide as it is. Next, we're also going to display grid. And then we're going to tell it how many columns it goes across. So this is telling it how many columns of the previous grid. So we want it to start on the left and end on the right. And we can do that by going grid, column, 1/-1. So this means go start at the left and end at the right. And then we're going to say grid, row, the same thing, 1/-1. And what this means is start at the top and end on the bottom. If you're interested in learning more about CSS Grid, I have a video going over all the different aspects of CSS Grid, and it's linked in the description. Now we can save this, and we have all the styles for hero image box. So let's look at the HTML. The next thing we need to style is this image, but our image doesn't have a class. So we're going to add a class on line 13. So in between the source and the image, we'll type class equals quote, and we'll say hero image. And then we'll save that, and we'll go to our CSS, and we'll start styling hero image. So we'll say hero image, and then we'll do curly braces. We'll say width 100%. Then we'll say height 100%. So now we're telling that we're stretching the image to be as big and wide as it is tall. And then we're going to say object fit cover. So now if we save that and go back to our browser, you'll notice that the image fills up the entire screen no matter what we do with our browser window. So this way, when someone lands on our web page or on their cell phone, our image of our ocean will fill the entire screen, and this will be much more pleasing than having that white at the bottom. But the problem is, now I can't see my text. So we'll fix that in just a second. Let's look back at our HTML, and here we see next is hero text box. So let's style that. We'll go to our styles, and underneath hero image, we'll type hero-text box, then curly brackets. Scroll up to the top here. So let's style our hero text box. We're going to tell it what grid rows to go to, the same as right here. So we can actually copy lines 48 and 49. So press Control-C and then Control-V. Now our text should be up here at the top because we told it start on the left and start on the top and go to the bottom. But that doesn't look so good. So let's continue to style it better. So after we tell it, we're going to say align self, and then we're going to say center. If we save that, now our text is aligned vertically in the center. We also want it to be in the middle, so we'll say text align center. And if we save that, now we have our text in the middle. We're starting to get somewhere now. After that, we're going to give it some padding of 1 rem. This just adds a little space around the text. And then we're going to make sure it is forward. We're going to give it a Z index of 10. This makes sure it's going to be above anything we put below it. If we save that and look at it, looking good. Now we can style each of these pieces of text separately. Let's go back and look at our HTML. So in our HTML, we just did hero text box. Now we have our H1, so let's do hero heading. So let's go back to our CSS. At the bottom, we're going to type period, hero, heading. Now we have our curly braces, and let's style this. Let's give it a larger font size. So save that, and then we go back, and now it's just a little bit bigger. With all of our CSS styling, we're styling mobile first. So I'm going to move this over as if it was on a cell phone. We want to make it look like this first, then we'll fix the desktop styles. So underneath the font size, we're going to give it some letter spacing. And we're going to give it 0.05 rem. This will space the letters out a bit. We're going to give it a font weight of bold. Then we're going to give it text transform in uppercase. So now all the letters will be uppercase. And then we're going to give it a new color. We'll say color white. Save that. And now if we look in our browser, we can see our text has a color of white and it's all bold. Now let's fix the text below it. If we go to our HTML, that's called hero text. I'm going to go back to styles and we'll type hero-text, then curly braces. Now we'll say font size 1 rem, margin, we'll type margin top, and this will be 0.5 rem. So this will give it a little space on the top, so it just punches it down just a little bit. And then we're going to give it a color of white. And if I save that and look here, everything is white, but it's pretty hard to read. So what I want to do is add just a transparent gradient over this scene right here. We can do that just with CSS. So I'm going to scroll back up in my CSS file. Right here at hero image box, I want to do something after the hero image box. I want to add just a gray tone there. So what I'm going to type is .hero-image-box, and then I'm going to put a colon and another colon and type after. You might recall we did this earlier with the box sizing, then curly braces. And here, this is just a quirk of CSS, but I have to type content and then give it some content. If I don't do that, this won't work. So we're saying there is content, but nothing, just no content. Now we're going to give it a background color. And we can use all kinds of colors. We can type in colors, but we can also use RGBA. So red, green, blue, alpha. So I'm going to type RGBA and then parentheses. And I want this to be black. So I'm going to type 0, 0, 0. So that's no red, no green, no blue. And then I can type one more comma and give it an opacity. And I'm going to type 0.4, so 40% opacity. And if I save that, next, I'm going to say height 100 VH with 100%. And then I'm going to say position absolute. What this means is it's going to be positioned absolutely within its container. And since it's coming after hero image box, it will be positioned inside hero image box. And so we're going to tell it you're 100% the size of hero image box, and you start at the top, 0, so this is the top left, and the left, 0. If I save that and go back to our browser, now you can see that we can see our ocean, but it's faded in the background because we put this gray on top. If I add some green to this, so let's say 140 green, and I save that, you'll notice now I have a green tone on top. This is a great way to do this because you don't have to actually style your image to change the tone of your website. I'm going to go ahead and leave this at 0 for black. You can use the color picker here to pick your own colors as well. So I can pick this color and it will automatically fill in the numbers. So if I save that, now I have this pink tone. Actually, that's kind of fun, so I'm going to leave that for a little bit. Here, having an image is great, but what if I wanted to have a video when people land on my web page? Remember, I made that video, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add that. Let's go back to the index.html. In order to add a video, I'm going to replace this image. So on line 13, I'm going to highlight everything, and then I'm going to delete it. Then I'm going to type video, enter. This is very similar to the image. So now I got to give it a source. And remember, in my files, I have a video folder, and inside I have my Ocean MP4. So then I'll type video / and I can select this from the list, Ocean. And if I save that and go back to my browser, I will have a video here. But it doesn't play, so I need to make some things happen so it automatically plays. So here, after the MP4 quote, but inside that, it's important that it's inside this caret, I'll put space, and then I'll say autoplay, and then I'll say muted, just in case there's any sound, and then loop, because I want it to play again and again. So if I save that and I go back to my browser, now I have this video of the ocean. But there's a problem. It doesn't fill the screen, so it doesn't look as good as the image. How can we make that work better? Here I can add a class equals hero video. And if I save that and go back to my browser, nothing happens. That's because we haven't told the CSS what to do with hero video. Let's go to our CSS. If you remember, we have hero image, and this is what made our image fit the whole screen. If I go after image and I type a comma, then I type period hero dash video, now both of these have the same styles. And if I save that and I go back to my browser, now I have this full screen video that looks pretty cool. This is a local video, so it loads very quickly. But what if I had a video that was taking a bit to load? What I can do is have a background image that's the first frame of the video. To do that, we'll go to our CSS file, and after hero image and hero video, we'll add another entry for hero video. Then we'll put our curly braces, and we're going to give it a background color. And for this one, we'll give it a background color of black. We can use the hashtag 000, and that will make it black. Then we're also going to give it a background image. And for the background image, we need to type URL, then parentheses, then quote, then .. /img/ then we can scroll down and click ocean. Perfect. Then we need to say background, repeat. Then we'll say no repeat, because we only want to have one image. Then we'll say background size, cover, because we want it to cover the whole place. And then background position. We'll say center. If I save this and go to our browser, we won't notice anything. So let's make an error and pretend that the video isn't loading. So if I go to index.html, instead of ocean, I type ocean1.mp4 and save that. Then if I go to the browser, we get this background image. So even if the video doesn't load on a slow internet connection, we still have this image here. And it's the first frame of our video, so it looks like it'll loop perfectly. So here I'll go back to Ocean and I'll save that. And then in Chrome, everything looks fine. Now we have our whole header done and it looks great. Let's put some comments in our HTML file so we can keep track of it. So under the body, I pressed enter. To make a comment in HTML, you type angle bracket, exclamation point, dash dash, and I'm going to say begin hero header. And then after the header, I'm going to make another comment, angle bracket, exclamation point, dash dash, and I'm going to say end hero header. That way I know right where this is for later. Congratulations, now we have a hero header. Next, we're going to add a portfolio gallery and an about page. But before we add our about section and our portfolio section, we need to make sure that our website works on mobile devices and desktops. Remember, we're designing for mobile first, so this looks great on mobile, but what if I make my browser bigger, like on a desktop? Now the text looks kind of small, so I kind of want it to look bigger on a desktop. So let's go to our CSS and fix that. In Styles, go down to the bottom of the file. We're going to add another comment. We're going to put a slash, then a star, and then we're going to say add media. These will be media queries for large screens. Remember, all the styles will be for mobile devices, but then we want the experience to be good on big screens as well. We're only going to set 2 large screens. So to do that, we're going to say at media, then we're going to say min width, so the minimum width of 600 pixels. So once it's 600 pixels, then do these things. So curly braces, and we'll say hero heading, and we'll make the hero heading font size 4 rem, and then we'll make the line height 4 rem. Then for the hero text box, we'll change the font size to 2 rem, and then we'll make the line height 2 rem. This is a typo. This should be hero text instead of hero text box. If I save that and I go back, now you can see that this is larger. And if we want any padding around this, we can add a little bit of padding. So we can type hero text box and then make padding 2 rem. So this just adds a little bit of space in between those two things. Excellent. Let's add one more media query for really big screens. So underneath this, all the way down after the last curly brace, press enter, then type at media, then we'll put parentheses, min width, colon, 920 pixels. So anything above 920 pixels, then we'll put curly braces and we'll type hero heading, then curly braces. And for this one, we'll say font size 6 rem, and then we'll say line height 6 rem. If I save that, now for a big screen like this, we really can see how this looks great. So we get this nice impact if we're on a desktop computer. And then as our screen gets smaller, we notice that here on a tablet, it's just a little bit smaller and it looks nice. And then when we get down to a cell phone size, everything looks good. And you could add the line height here to be a little bit more. If you want this line height to be a little bit taller, we can go to our CSS at the very beginning. And so for our hero header, right here, we can add this line height to be just a little bit taller. So we'll make line height 2 rem. And if we save that and go back to our browser, now you can see it has a little bit of a space right there on the mobile devices. So that looks nicer. Now everything is done and we have desktop styles and mobile styles for our hero page. But if we look at our online website, it still says the hello world from my laptop. So let's fix that. If we go to Visual Studio Code, then we click on our source control icon, we notice that we've made some changes. So here I'm going to say finished hero. Then I'm going to click the check mark. Now we've committed everything on our local computer, but we need to click the sync box on the lower left. Once I do that, it's going to upload everything to our repository on GitHub. And then later, when we look in the browser, we have hello world from our laptop. It can take a few minutes to update everything, but once it's updated and we reload the page, once the page is reloaded, we can see everything on our actual website as well. Let's go back to our HTML. Below our hero section, let's add a new comment. Let's type open bracket, exclamation point, dash, dash, begin portfolio. And then right below that, let's do another comment, exclamation point, dash, dash, end portfolio. So we're going to put all our portfolio code in between here. That way it's easy to see what we're doing. Before we start adding the images to our portfolio, we're going to get a little JavaScript that we can use to make a lightbox effect so it's easy to browse our images. Go to a browser, and then you're going to type Lightbox into a search engine, and you'll come to this page right here. We're going to click Download, and then once we have these files, we're going to unzip them. When they're unzipped, you'll see this Lightbox-master. If you twirl it out, you'll see a bunch of different files. We don't need all of those files. We just need the folder that says dist. So I'm going to double click there. And then inside here, we have two folders, CSS and JavaScript. Twirl these out. And then we need two of these files. I'm going to get a new Finder window. Here in my new Finder window on the left, I have my website. On the right, I have the Lightbox code. I want to get this lightbox.min.css, and I'm going to drag it and put it in my CSS folder. So now it's over here. Then I'm going to get the lightbox.min.js, and I'm going to drag it to my JS folder. Perfect. Then I can go back to Visual Studio Code. To make this work, we need to go up to our head, and then underneath this style sheet, we need to add another one. So I'm going to type link, then css/glightbox.min.css. Now I have the CSS for the lightbox. Then at the bottom of the page, right before the body tag, I'm going to type script, enter. Then inside the first script tag, I'm going to type src equals quote, and then I'm going to type js/glightbox.min.js. So now we've added this script to our code. You put all JavaScript right before the end of the body. Then we just need to call the code. So we're going to type script, enter. Then inside the first script tag, we're going to type equals, quote, text/JavaScript. This just tells it that it is JavaScript. Then we'll put our cursor in between the opening and closing script tags and press enter. Then we're going to just type a little bit of JavaScript code that will tell us how to use the lightbox. We're going to type const. This means a constant variable. We're going to call this variable lightbox. Then we're going to say this variable equals capital G, capital L, L-I-G-H-T, B-O-X. Then we're going to type parentheses, then curly braces, then space, loop, colon, true, close curly braces, close parentheses, semicolon. And if we save that, now we have the code for Lightbox. And if you're curious about the Lightbox code, everything is here in the examples. So you can scroll down here and it'll tell you how everything works and what code to put in. So in the documentation right there. And it'll be on GitHub and it shows you all the different commands that you can use. But this is the only one we need for our code. So let's go start coding our portfolio. You can see here, we know right where to go in between our comments. So here I'm going to type a section and I'm going to type section. Then I'm going to press enter. And here I'm going to use a class. So I'm going to go in the front tag. So inside this section, I'm going to add a class. I'm going to call it class equals, quote, portfolio container. Then I'll put my cursor in between the opening and closing tags and press enter. Inside this section, I'd like to add a header. So I'll type H1, enter, and then I'm going to type portfolio. Then after the header, I'm going to add another section. And there's an easier way to add a class. So I can just type section, then press period, then type the class name that I want. This time I'm going to type portfolio-gallery. You don't have to do it that way, but it can save time. Then I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to give a div, then press period, and then type gallery-item, enter. So now I have a div class gallery item. A div is just a container in HTML that we can use to hold things. Next, I'm going to use a link tag. So I'm going to say a, enter. Now it's asking for a link. I want a link to an image. So I'm going to type img, slash, and I'm going to pick the very first image at the top. Here I have my image name. Then I want to give this link a class. It's important to give it a class so we can use the lightbox. So I'm going to give it a class equals, quote, G lightbox. Then inside this A tag, and A is a link, I'm going to press enter. And then I'm going to type img, enter. And for this, I'm going to make the source the same. So I want this to be exactly the same. So I'm just going to copy it, put it there so it's exactly the same. And for the alt tag, I'm going to type an image of a flower. And I also need to add a class to this. So I'm going to say class equals, quote, gallery dash img. And then I'll save that. So now I have a gallery item, which is right here. From this div to this div is a gallery item. And inside is an image that has a link to it. So now I can add as many images as I want. And I'm going to go ahead and do that by copy and pasting. I can highlight this, then press enter, then paste. And all I need to do is change these tags. So if I highlight this and then press delete and then slash, it's going to give me the chance to select the next image. Then I can copy this, copy, and then paste the same thing down here in the image source, update the alt tag. So this is an image of a flower. This is an image of a bindweed flower. And then I continue doing that until all my images are there. So I'll continue to do that. Now I've added all my gallery items. You should add as many images that you want to add to your gallery. Notice that all my images are named with descriptive names, and also they have my name in them. This will help Google image search and other search engines find your images and promote them to other people. I have a video about how to name files for the web and also how to optimize your images for the web. It's linked in the description. Now, if I save this and I go back to our browser, you'll notice that I have all these images of flowers underneath. And it's not the end of the world. This looks okay, just as is. I already have images. If I make it smaller for a cell phone, not too bad. But we can make this better, especially on a large screen. And you can see how we have this weird thing happening with the portfolio on a large screen. So we'll fix all that with the CSS. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and look at the top of our portfolio. At the top, we have a class portfolio container. Well, that means we need to style portfolio container in our styles.css. So let's do that. So let's go down to the bottom, but not all the way down to the bottom. We want to go before the media queries, but after the hero. So I'm going to press enter twice. Then I'm going to put a comment that says portfolio gallery styles. Then close that comment. And then we want to have our class of portfolio container. And then curly braces. And now we'll add our styles for our portfolio container. So for our portfolio container, we want to give it a margin of 1 rem, then auto, then 0, then auto. The way this works is like a clock. This is the top margin, then the right margin, then the bottom margin, then the left margin. This will center everything on the screen. Next, we want to style the heading. If we look at our HTML, the next thing is our portfolio heading. Let's go ahead and style that. So we'll go to our styles.css, and to style that, we type portfolio container, and then we put a space H1 because we want the headings inside the portfolio container. And then we're going to give this a font size of 2 rem, make it nice and big. And then we're going to give it a line height of 2 rem. We'll save that. Next, if we look at our HTML, portfolio gallery is the next class. So let's go ahead and style that. So after portfolio container, we're going to type portfolio gallery, then curly braces, then we're going to say display grid, then we're going to tell it about its columns. So for this, we're going to use a special auto columns in CSS Grid. And again, I have a video showing you all about CSS Grid linked in the description. So we're going to type grid template columns. Then we can say repeat. So we're going to repeat the columns a certain amount of times. Then we say parentheses. We'll say auto fit, then comma. Then we're going to say the minimum and maximum size. So they have to be a minimum, type min max. They have to be a minimum of 300 pixels, then comma, and then the maximum is 1 FR. Remember, 1 FR is a fractional unit. Then we can add a grid gap. So we'll say grid gap. We'll say 0.5 rem. Then under the grid gap, we'll say grid auto rows 300 pixels. This way we'll make squares. If I save that and we go to our browser, on this size, it looks basically the same. But if we make it larger, now you can see we start to have this grid. But you notice that because of the orientation of the different images, some of the things don't look exactly right. So we're going to go ahead and fix that. Let's go back to our HTML. So the next thing is the gallery item. You see this gallery item right here. So let's style that in CSS. So underneath portfolio gallery, we'll type period gallery dash item, and then curly braces. We're going to give it a height of 100% and a width of 100%. And then overflow, anything that goes over that, we're going to say hidden. Then we also need to style the images in the gallery, because if in our HTML, we see this next class of our gallery images. On my screen, it's over to the right here. So I have class gallery image. So we need to style that in CSS. So we'll type period gallery dash img, and then we'll add some styles. We'll also say height 100%. Then we'll say object fill cover, and then we'll save that and look at our gallery here. And now you notice that everything fits in the square boxes because we're saying fill in the box, and then anything that goes outside, hide it. So now we have this nice looking gallery that automatically changes in size depending on the browser width. So we're getting there. But we can make this look even cooler. So what we're going to do is we're going to say .gallery img, and then we're going to say colon. When we hover, so this is saying a behavior, when we hover our cursor over curly braces, we're going to say transform. This is just like in Photoshop. We're going to transform the scale, and we're going to say 1.5. If I save that and we go back to our browser, when I hover, they get bigger. But that's kind of jerky. It's kind of very fast, right? So we can go back to our CSS, and for the gallery image, we can say transition colon 0.5 seconds, and then ease in and out. Just like an animation, we can tell it to ease in and out, and we save that, and we go back to our browser. Now when I hover over, we ease in and out, so that's a little bit nicer. This is totally optional, but it's just a nice little thing to show your users that something is happening. Let's go back to the code. So now we need to add some media queries for our portfolio. To do that, we'll scroll down to the bottom, and underneath the hero, for our 600 pix devices, we're going to type .portfolio container h1, and we're going to make that bigger. And so we'll put curly braces, and then we will say font size 3 rem, and then line height 3 rem. Then we also want to add some styles for when it's very wide. So under the hero heading in the 920 pixels media query, remember, make sure you're inside this last curly brace. We're going to type portfolio container, then curly braces, and then we're going to say max width, and we'll give it a max width of 1400 pixels. This will keep it narrow on very large screens. And then after that, we're going to say portfolio h1, and we're going to give it a larger font size. So we'll say font size 4 rem, and then we'll say line height 4 rem. And if we save that and go back to our browser, now we have this large portfolio. And if we come out here, notice that it doesn't keep going as our browser gets wider. So we can keep those styles to a minimum there. And if we click on it, our lightbox works. And then we can scroll back and forth on our images. We can also add captions to our lightbox. In order to do that, we can go back to Visual Studio Code. The instructions for adding captions are here in the README, so you can see all the instructions right here in the examples of the different things you can do. So right here we see we just add data G lightbox, and we can add a title and a description. So let's copy that right here. We'll copy it from GitHub. And then notice it's right after the class and the image, so we can put it at the end of the opening A tag. So let's go to our HTML, and on this first flower, remember, this is the opening A tag after the class. So we'll go right here, and I'll paste that in. And we don't want it to be my title, so we want to say flower. And then after description right here, we'll say, this is an amazing flower picture I took. And if I save that and I go back to my browser and my portfolio, if I click on this first image, notice now I have a caption. And you don't need to have a caption on every image. You can have captions on all the images or no caption at all. So you just add that in the HTML. So now you can add as many images to your gallery as you want, and they'll work fine. So now that we have captions and our lightbox is working, we still have a problem on wide browsers. Our portfolio heading gets chopped off by the video. And then this also happens sometimes when we're on really small, narrow sections. We can't see the video either. So how can we fix this? Well, what we need to do is tell it when the video gets too big, we want to hide anything that overflows. We can do this in CSS. Remember, in our HTML, we have the video is in a class hero video. So let's go to our styles and change hero video. Here we are right here on line 66. I can press enter and then say overflow hidden. And then if I save that and go back to the browser, now no matter what size I make this, any of that video that sticks out will just be hidden. So this looks really great. So if I reload the page, it automatically makes it the size of this viewport. And then if I make it different sizes and scroll down, I don't have any extra video. Now we have a great website with an opening page and a portfolio. But we may want a button to be able to go to the portfolio. So let's add a button that goes to the portfolio. Back in Visual Studio Code, in the index.html, up in the hero header section, after the first paragraph that says surf on, let's press enter and add a new paragraph. Press P, then enter. Then inside this P, we're going to add a link. To add a link, we press A, then enter. And for the href, we're going to type hashtag portfolio. This is a special type of link called an anchor link. It links to something on the page called an ID. Then we're going to add a button. Press enter. Then in the opening button tag, we have to tell it what type of button it is. We'll say type equals button. Now this might seem strange to call a button, but the default behavior is submit, and we're not submitting anything. Then we're going to give it a class. We'll say class equals, quote, hero button. And then inside the button, we'll say view portfolio. Then we need to go down to the portfolio. And right here on this section class, we're going to add an ID. So right here where it says begin portfolio section, inside that opening tag, I'll type ID equals portfolio. IDs are like classes, except you can only have one ID. It's just like everyone can be a student, but there's only one student with a particular name. So there can only be one ID with this name per web page. So this is ID portfolio. And if I save that and go to the browser, now I have this button. And if I click on it, I go to the portfolio page. You see right here, now it's portfolio at the top. Pretty cool. But this button doesn't look very nice. Let's make it look nicer with CSS. So we have a style, right? Class hero button. We'll go to our styles. Then in our hero section, so before the portfolio gallery styles, we'll type .hero-button, then curly braces. Then we'll add some styles. So we're going to say display, and we'll say inline block. Then we're going to give it some padding. We're going to give it on the top and the bottom, we're going to give it 0.75 rem. And then on the right and the left, we're going to give it 2 rem. Then we're going to give it a background of none. That means it's transparent. Then we're going to give the text a color of white. Then the font size will increase, font size. And we'll make that font size be 1.2 rem. Then the font weight will be bold. Then we're going to give this a border. So we're going to give it a border of 1 pixel, make it a solid border, and then we'll make the border white. And then we're going to give a border radius just to make it rounded on the side. So we'll say border radius 5 pixels. So that means it's going to have rounded corners. And then we're going to give it a little margin on the top. So we'll say margin top, and then we're going to give it 2 rem. If I save that and we go back to our browser, now look, our button looks much nicer, but when I hover over it, I don't get any action and I don't get any click. So let's go ahead and fix that in the CSS. So go back to Visual Studio Code. So under Hero Button, we're going to give it hero-button, and then the action will be hover. And then for this, we're going to say transform, and then we're going to do scale, and it will be 0.95. If we save that and go back to our browser, now when I hover over it, you can see that the button looks like it's going to be clicked. So that's a nice effect there. And you could do many different effects, but this is something simple. And then back on Visual Studio Code, we're going to give it an active state. So when it says hero-button, remember to always put the period before your class names. Active, then curly braces. We're going to give it a background of RGBA, and then we're going to give it 0, 0, 0, and then we're going to give it an alpha channel of 0.3. And if we save that, go back to our browser, and then when we click it, we get this click. And you could reverse these if you prefer to have the click make it go down and then the hover be the gray. We could do that in CSS. All I have to do is switch these. So let's put the transform for the click, and then we'll put the gray for the hover. And if I go back to the browser, now I get gray for hover, and when I click my button, it goes down. So these are all personal preferences, but look how fast that snaps. What if we wanted it to scroll evenly? Well, we can do that. So let's go back to our CSS, and we need to go all the way up to the top to where the HTML is. So it's at the very top. And what we're going to do is after height in the HTML tag, so look, I'm inside the curly brace, I'm going to type scroll behavior. We're going to type smooth. If I save that and go back to the browser, now if I click on this, it's going to scroll to Portfolio. But some people don't like this, and it can be an accessibility issue. So what we want to do is add an option that if people have set in their operating system to reduce motion for their vision, we don't want to then suddenly have everything moving. So we can do that by saying @media. Then we put parentheses and we say prefers dash reduced motion. And then we put a curly braces. And now we say HTML, curly braces, scroll behavior. And then we say initial. And the way cascading style sheets work, this first HTML happens, and then the next one could be overridden if this is true, if prefers reduce motion is true. And so we want to make sure we add this so we respect people's preferences. So now we have our portfolio looks great on mobile because everything is full width. And then when we make it out, our grid template columns become these nice squares. So our portfolio is looking great. Now that we have our portfolio button working, we want to make sure that we sync those changes with the GitHub remote. So click on source control. And then here for the message, I'm going to say updated portfolio site. Then I'll click the check mark. And this will commit the changes to our local Git repository, but we want to sync them with the remote one. So click on the bottom left and it will sync all the changes. Now we can see our portfolio on the web. Next, let's go back to our index.html. After the portfolio page, we're going to go ahead and add an about page. So let's go down to the bottom. After end portfolio, let's add some comments. So we'll put open bracket, exclamation point, 2 dashes, and then we'll say begin about. Then we can just copy this, and then on the new line, paste it, and then we can say end about. Then in between these two comment tags, we'll put all our about parts. First, let's add a section. So we can type section, and remember, if we put a period, then type a class name, it'll automatically happen. So I'm going to type about container, and then I'll press enter. Inside this section, I'm going to add another section. Section dot about dash text. So that gives it the class of about text. Then inside this, I'm going to add an H1. This H1 will be a call out about what I'm doing. So I'm going to say Mutona Authenton creates bumblebees and fruit pies. So let's save that and look at it. If I go back to my portfolio on the local area, I can scroll down to the bottom, and then here I see my H1. Remember, we don't have any CSS styling yet, so it will still show up on the internet, but we want to make it look better in a second. Let's keep going. So after this H1, let's add a paragraph. I'll press paragraph. And I don't know what I want to put here, so I'm going to put in some lorem ipsum text. So I can type lorem, and then I can type 25. It's going to put some lorem ipsum text. This is just dummy text that people use in internet design. So next, on the next line, I'm going to add another paragraph, P, enter. And then inside this, I'm going to type lorem 15. And if I save that and go back to the browser, you'll notice that I have some paragraph text. So if you type lorem, then a number, it'll just make that many words. This is just so we can see what something looks like without having to know what our copy is. If you have about copy already, go ahead and put in the real words. Then after this paragraph, I'm going to add one more paragraph. I'm going to press P, enter, and then I'm going to make a link. So I'm going to type A, enter, and for the href, I'm going to say mail to, email at example.com. So I'm going to have this link be a mail to link. This will open up a user's email. And then for the text of the link, I'm going to say email me. And then next to it, I'm going to put in the paragraph my actual email at example.com. That way a user can copy the email address, or they can click on this email me link and it'll open up their default email browser. Since I'm having contact information on the About page, I may also want to add links to social media accounts. And we can do that and add nice icons to the social media accounts. But to get the icons, we have to go get them from the internet. If you go to a browser and you type in Font Awesome, you'll go to fontawesome.com. We can download their icon packs and use them on our website. So click Start for free, then scroll down to where it says Download, and then eventually click right here where it says Download Font Awesome Free. When it downloads, open up the zip file. So here I have the zip file, and we need two things from it. We need this entire web fonts folder. We need to take this and we need to put it in our documents and then in our actual repository. So here we have our web fonts are now in the repository. The last thing we need from our downloads is in the CSS. So if we look right here in Font Awesome, we have the CSS. We need this all.min.css. So we can drag that to documents and then put that in our CSS folder. So again, we need this all.min.css and this entire web fonts folder right there. That should be it. Then we can go back to Visual Studio Code. Now underneath the email link, I'm going to make a div. Then I'm going to type period to make a class, and I'm going to give it a class of about-social. I'll press enter. Then I'm going to make a link to Twitter. So I'm going to type a, enter. And then in the href, I'm going to type https://twitter.com/authenton. That's my Twitter address. And then after that, because it's an icon, we're going to type an ARIA label. This is for screen readers, and this will say link to Twitter. Then inside this link, we're going to type I, and then inside the I, we're going to add some classes. So on the first I, we'll say class equals quote, and then we'll say FAB, and then FA-Twitter. And then after the class, we need to add an ARIA label for screen readers. So we'll say ARIA-hidden, and then we'll say equals true, and then close quotes. And if we save that, now we have an icon. And I'm going to press enter because my font is larger here. And so now we have this link right here is a link to Twitter. Now we can add links to other social media sites. So I'm going to copy this entire link, and then right below I'll press enter and then paste it. And instead of going to Twitter, I'm going to have this one go to Instagram. And this one is Mutona Authenton. And then the same thing for the ARIA label. It's not a link to Twitter, it's a link to Instagram. And then, oh, here I have a typo. This should be FA, not BA. So FA, FA. And then this one should be Instagram. And then I can copy all of this again, copy. And then I can make a link to my LinkedIn profile. So I can say LinkedIn/IN/Mutona Authenton -252 BAA1B3. You can get your own LinkedIn link from your profile, and this is linked to LinkedIn. And then I'm going to move back over here, and for this, the FA will be LinkedIn. And then one last one, we're using GitHub, so I'm going to add my GitHub profile. So here I'll replace the HTTPS, and I'll say github.com, and then /Mutona Authenton. And this will be a link to GitHub. And then here for the icon, we'll say GitHub. And if we save that and then go to our browser, you'll notice at the bottom, we don't have those icons. That's because we need to add a link to the CSS in our HTML. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. In the index.html at the very top, here we have our Lightbox CSS. We also need to have our Font Awesome CSS. So type link, enter, and then for the href, we're going to type CSS and then /, and it's right here, allmin.css. And if we save that and then go back to our browser, Right down at the bottom here, you can see that we have these unstyled icons. There's Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and GitHub. Excellent. So now let's finish out our About section. So after that div, we're going to close this section. So this section right here was the section that has the About text. Now I'm going to press Enter. This section here is the closing tag for the About container. So in between these two closing sections, we're going to make a new section. So I'm going to type section dot about dash image. Then press Enter. So now we can add an image that will be on our About page. So for this, I'm going to type img, Enter. And then for the source, I'm going to type img /, and then I can pick this one right here, my profile. And then for the alt, I'm going to say Mutona Authenton profile picture. And then I'll save that. So now we have all the HTML typed for our About section. And if you see here, we have our profile picture, we have our icons, we have our email, we have our About text, but nothing is styled. So now we need to add some CSS. So let's do that. Back in Visual Studio Code, we'll go to our styles, and then down underneath Portfolio, and before the media queries, we'll put a comment, and we'll say About Styles, then close the comment, and then the first one will be the About container. Then curly braces. First, we want to display it as a grid. Then we're going to say grid template columns. And for this, we want the container to just have one column. So we'll type 1FR. And then we're going to give it some margin because we want it to be centered. So we'll say margin, 1 rem on the top, auto on the right, 0 on the bottom, and auto on the left. Next, we're going to style the About text. Curly braces. For the About text, we're going to say margin. And here we're going to say top and bottom 0, right and left auto. And if we just save that and go back to our browser, now you can see that this text is centered. Let's continue. If we go to our HTML, we know that the next thing is this H1. So we can style About text H1. So let's do that. In our styles, we're going to say dot about text, then H1, then curly braces. We can say font size 2 rem. And then for here, we'll say line height 2 rem. And remember, this is for mobile first. So this is a small size first. We'll add bigger sizes for larger screens later. Then after the H1, we want to style the image. So we can type about image. And then we need to style the image tag. So this is the class of the container that's holding the image. And then this is the actual image tag, just like the H1 above. See how the H1 is separate. Then we'll say height 100%. And then we'll say object fit, cover. Next, we're going to do the About social, then curly braces. So in the About social, we're going to do a different display. We're going to display flex. So a grid will display in 2 directions, in the X and Y. Display flex only displays either in the X or the Y. I also have a video linked in the description going over how to use display flex. But for this, we're going to justify our content at the start. And then we'll style the actual social media icons. So we'll do About social. And just like we have the H1 and the IMG, we'll type A, because that's the links. And then we're going to give them a color of black, because they're default blue, so now they're black. And then we're going to give them padding of 0 on the top, 1 rem on the right, 1 rem on the bottom, and then 1 rem on the left. And if I save that, we can go back to our browser. And here you can see how those are spaced out now, and they're black. We still have to style the container on big screens. You can see now this looks okay on a small screen, right? So we have a nice on the small screen, but we need to make it look good on a big screen. So let's go ahead and start to do that. So now let's go down to our media queries. And first, on the 600 pix media query, at the very bottom, we'll say about-container, and we're going to give it 2 columns now. So grid, template columns. On mobile, it'll have 1 column, but we'll type 1FR and 1FR, and that will just make it have 2 columns. And then we're going to give it a grid gap of 1 rem. And if I save that and go back to this, now look, we have this nice 2-column design here. But it gets pretty wide. We'll fix that in just a moment. So let's go back, and still within the 600 pix media query, we'll say about-text, and then give it curly braces. We'll say font, we want to style the H1, so we'll say font size. This one will be 3 rem, and then we'll give it a line height of 3 rem. Now, if we save that and go back to the browser, notice that this is larger when we have the big browser. Then we're going to continue going down. We also want to have the paragraph text be a little bit bigger on a big browser so it's easier to read. We'll say about text, and then we'll say P. And for this one, we'll say font size 1.1 rem. And then we're going to give it a bigger line height, so it's kind of like double spaced. Line height 1.5 rem. If we save that, go back to the browser, you can see how that gets bigger. Then we just need to do things for the really big screens. So we'll go down to the 920 pix, and then at the very bottom, we'll say about container. So this is the thing holding the text and the image. And right now, you see it goes all the way across the screen. We want to limit it just like we did with our portfolio. So we're going to give it a max width. So we'll say max width, and we'll give it 1400 pixels. And here, we can actually just add it to portfolio container. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to press a comma here and then say about container. This way, we only have to change one value, and then I can just delete that. And then we're going to change the about text H1. So we can do that here too. So we can just say about text H1. And so that cuts down on the typing. And then we can do the same thing for the paragraph. So we're going to say about text P, and then we're going to change the font size to 1.5 rem, and then we'll make the line height 2 rem. So we have a little bit of spacing. So we'll say line height 2 rem. And if we look up here, we've repeated ourselves. We have portfolio container H1 and about text H1. Sometimes you want to keep these separate, but since these are the same values, we can copy this and then put a comma and paste it there. And if we save that, those two will cover the same thing, and then I can delete this one. So that just saves a little bit of typing in your code and makes it easier to read. We'll save that and look in the browser. Now look at this. We made the max width so it lines up with our portfolio. And then everything changes as we move down in size. Right here, we move in size, and then it comes down even smaller, and then we see here. And we could add a left margin over here on the actual container. So why don't we do that? Because it's a little tight over there. I think the text should be off to the left a little bit. So we'll go ahead and at the very top up here, on the about text, we can add padding, and we can have it be on the top and bottom be 0. And then on the right and left, 1 rem. And if we save that, now this will be pushed over, and then it looks a little bit nicer since it's not pushed up against the side. And then that will also work on the large size. So there we go, all set with our about section. Let's go ahead and commit those changes by clicking on source control. For our message, we can say made about section. Then we click the check mark. Now we have committed it to our local Git, and then we click the sync button to sync it to our remote repository. Next, we'll add some navigation. Here is our remote website. This looks great. We have our portfolio and we have our about section down here, but we have to scroll through it. It'd be nice if we had a navigation at the top that we could click straight to Portfolio and straight to About. And then if we were down at our About section, we could click to go back to the portfolio. Yes, it's right here, but as your website portfolio evolves, this might be a longer section, or you might have other sections that you want to be able to navigate between. So to do that, we can add a navigation menu. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and then in our index, let's go to the top. So before the hero header, we can go ahead and put in a new comment. So we'll put bracket, exclamation point, dash dash, and we'll say begin top-nav. And then we can copy this, go one line down, and we'll say end top-nav. And then we'll put a space in between here and a space in between here. Now we're going to start to add a nav. So we can type nav dot nav dash bar, and then we can add one more class, top dash nav, and we press enter. Notice that I have two classes. They have a space in between because I used the period twice. You can type these in manually or use the shortcuts in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to press enter. Now I need an H1. So I'm going to type H1 and then period logo. Then inside this H1, I want to have a link. I want to have this basically link back to the home page. So I'll type A, enter. For the H reference, I can just type index.html because that's where we are. We're on the index.html. And for the text of this link, I'm going to type Mutona Authentin. And if I save that and we go back to our browser on our local site, at the very top, you'll see this, and it's at the top, which is nice, but now you notice that our background and everything is getting misaligned. That's because we're going to have to position this so it makes sense on top of this hero image. But let's get the HTML in first, and then we'll style everything with CSS. So back in Visual Studio Code, after the H1, we're going to add an unordered list. This is just like a list of bullet points, and it's commonly used for navigation. So we'll type UL, period, nav-menu, enter. This gives us a UL, or an unordered list with a class of nav menu. Then inside this, we're going to add list items. So we'll type li.navItem. Now I have a list item with a class name of navItem. Inside this, I'm going to type A, enter. And for this href, we're going to link to on the page because we're making a single page portfolio. Remember, we gave our portfolio an ID of portfolio. So to link to that, just like our button, we put a hashtag in front of it and it'll go to that ID. So what I do is I type hashtag portfolio. Then I want to make another nav item. So I'm going to copy this, press enter, then paste it. And instead of portfolio, I'm going to say about. And we need some link text. So on this first line, in between the A tags, I'll type portfolio, and then here I'll type about. But we don't have an ID on our about page, so we need to add one. So let's go down to the about page. And then right here at the beginning of about, this section, I'm going to add an ID equals about. Now, when we click on about, it'll come to this ID. Back up at the nav bar, we're going to add in our social icons. So what we want to do is make a new list class. So we'll say li.nav-item, and then we're going to add another class. Remember, I can just put another period. Then I can say social-nav-item and enter. So now you see it has two classes. We know it's two because there's a space right here. Inside this list item, I want to put all the icons that I used for my social media. But I don't want to retype all that, so I'm going to go down to my About page. And here I have all my social media icons. I'm just going to copy all of these, Command or Control C. I'm going to come back up to the top. And then underneath this list class, I'm going to paste them. Now the problem is these aren't in list items. So what I need to do is copy this first section. So I'm going to copy that. And in front of each of these, so in front of Twitter, I'm going to paste this and then press enter. And notice that Visual Studio Code automatically adds an LI, so that can be confusing. So I think it's easier if I copy this list item, I know I have 4 social media icons. I'm going to press enter, paste, enter, paste, enter, paste. So now I have 4 list items. And then in between the 2 tags, I can paste my social media. So the first one is Twitter. So I'll highlight it and press Control or Command X to cut. And then right here, I'll paste it. And then I'll press enter and enter. And if I save that, now I have all of this inside that list item. I can do the same thing here. I can press Control X, and then inside this list item, I'll paste. Then I can go right here and press Control X, and then inside this list item, I can paste. And then I can highlight my GitHub, Control X, and paste. Now I have all my social media icons inside my list classes. Let's look to see what that looks like. So up at the top here, you can see I have my list. It's an unordered list, just like bullet points. I have Portfolio and About and my social media icons. Now we need to add some styling. So the first thing we have is our nav bar. We're going to have a nav bar in the footer. That's why we have this extra class top-nav. But we'll style the nav bar first. So let's go to CSS. And then we're going to put this at the top because it comes before everything else. So we'll go all the way up to the top of our CSS. So right after, this is the basic style. So right before hero styles, we'll put a comment and we'll say nav bar styles. And now let's start adding our nav bar styles. The first one is the class of nav bar. So we'll type .nav space dash bar, then curly brackets. We want to display flex because the nav bar is only horizontal, so we can use display flex. Then we want everything to wrap, so we'll say flex, wrap, wrap. Then we're going to justify the content. We want everything to be in the center, so we'll say justify content center. We also want to align the content in the middle, that's the vertical, so we'll say align items. And then we'll also say center. We need to give it a line height, so we'll give it a line height of 1 rem. Then we also want the overflow to be hidden. We want to give it a background color. Background color of hashtag FFF, that's just white. And then we want to give it a Z index very high. So I'm going to give it a Z index of 100. That should be plenty high because we need to make sure that it's on top of anything else. And we already gave our button a Z index of 10. So this will put it on top of everything so we can click on it. Otherwise, it'll be behind all the images. Next, let's style the logo. So I'm going to type logo. And I also want to style the nav menu. So nav menu. This is the unordered list. So nav menu, then curly braces. And I want to do text transform. And we're going to say uppercase. So this will make everything uppercase. Let's take a look at that. So now we have everything in the center, right? So this is looking good. But we still have all these vertically, and we have these dots. Everything is nice and capitalized. That looks nice. So let's go back to our CSS and continue. We're going to type logo, then comma, and this time we're going to type nav item. These are like portfolio, about, and in case we have like a long one, we don't want it to wrap to the next line. So we're going to say white space, no wrap. And this will keep a long menu item on the same line. Next, we need to style the nav menu itself. Remember, this is the unordered list, the UL. So we're going to type .nav-menu, then curly braces. The first thing we want to do is get rid of those bullet points. So we'll say list, style, and then we'll say none. And if I save that and we go back, you'll see now we don't have those bullet points. It's already starting to look more like a website. Then we're also going to display this flex. So we'll say display flex. And just doing that, if I go back, now everything's on the same line, but everything's scrunched together. So we need to fix that. We're going to say flex wrap, no wrap. We don't want these to wrap on mobile. Then we're going to say justify content, space evenly. And then we'll also align the items in the center. Align items center. We're going to zero out the padding and the margin. And we should move this smaller because remember we're doing the mobile design first, and then we'll make it look good on larger screens. So here we have everything smashed together. We'll fix that as we go. So now let's actually style the nav items. Remember, these are the things in the list class. So we just got done styling the nav menu. Now we're going to style the nav items. So back in our styles.css, we'll go down a line and we'll type period nav dash item and then curly braces. Now we're going to type flex grow 1, flex shrink 0, and then we're going to say flex basis 33.3%. And if we save that and look, now we can see that everything has spread about, but now we have this overlapping. We'll fix that. We also want to do text align center. So now we need to fix the spacing of our social nav items as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll type social dash nav dash item, then curly braces. And inside here, we're going to type flex grow 1, and then we'll say flex shrink 1, and then we'll say flex basis 10%. And if we save that, now we have all our social icons are close together, but we still need to make more space. So let's continue styling in the CSS. Next, we're going to type logo A, then nav menu A. So these are the links, and we're going to say display block. Then we're going to say no text decoration. This will remove the underlines of the links. Notice that there's no underline underneath there. So we're going to give it some letter spacing. So we'll say letter spacing 0.2 rem, and then padding 0.8 rem, and then color, we're going to make it black as default. Now that we have these as display block, notice that they flip down to the bottom. So now it looks really nice on mobile. Let's continue. Now we need to have our nav menu items. So we're going to say nav-menu A, and we're going to change the font weight. We're going to say font weight. We're going to make it just a little bit lighter. We're going to say 400. And then we're going to say letter spacing 0.1 rem. And then we're going to say border bottom. And for the border bottom, we're going to say 1 pixel solid. And then we're going to make it white, FFF. And then we're going to have it a transition all ease 0.1 seconds. So that's how long it will ease. So we did this before with the zoom in on our portfolio. We're going to have this border bottom appear when we're hovering over our nav menus, but we still need to add that styling in. The next thing we'll do is make the logo just a little bit bigger. So we'll say logo A. So the link in the logo, we're going to say font weight, and we'll say 700. And then font size, and then we'll say 2 rem. And if we save that and we go back to our browser, now our logo is nice and big at the top. We've added some spacing to our letters. Next, we need to have the nav menu A hover. So we say nav-menu, and then we do :hover. So this is when you are hovering over. Got to put a space and an A there. Then inside the curly braces, we say border bottom, going to be 1px, and then solid, and then make it black. By typing in this A hover of a border bottom black, and then the default one being white, on the normal nav menu, it will show up as white, and then when we hover, it'll look like it became underlined. We need both of these, otherwise it'll look like the text jumps. But if we look at our actual page, notice we don't see any underlines. That's because we need to position the nav bar. It's not positioned and it's just kind of behind everything. So our mouse is not interacting with it because everything else is in front of it. So we need to add some specific top nav styles. If you remember in our HTML, we added this top nav style class. So let's use that to style the nav bar. So we go back to styles and let's add a comment and we'll say top nav bar only styles. And then we'll type period top dash nav and then curly braces. And for this one, we're going to make a background of none just to make sure it's transparent. And then we're going to say position fixed. Then we're going to tell it where it's fixed, and we're going to say at the top, 0. And then if we save that, we can go back to our browser, and now you can see that our nav bar reacts to our hover. And also notice that now it's on top, and we don't have that white box there, because now it has no background. So this is looking good, but if you notice, you see how the Twitter and the Instagram, they're down below. That's because this doesn't all have the same line height. We can fix that by going to the nav menu. So here is our nav menu, .nav menu. And right here, we can add a line height of 1.5 rem. And if we save that and go back, now you can see all of these are spaced out evenly. We still have some spacing to deal with, but everything looks pretty good right now. So let's go back down to our top nav styles. Next, we're going to style the top nav colors because black is a little distracting with our current scheme. So we're going to say top dash nav. And then we're also going to do logo A. So we want the logo A, and then top dash nav, nav menu A. So this is selecting the A that's in the logo, that's in the top nav, and it's selecting the A that's in the nav menu, that's in the top nav. Then we can do our curly braces. We're going to say color white. If we save that, you'll see everything became white. But now we can see the hover state all the time. So we need to make this border transparent. So let's go down and do that. So we're going to say top dash nav, nav menu A, and what we want to do is have the border on the bottom 1 pixel solid, and we're going to use our RGBA, and this time we're going to say it doesn't matter what color because it's going to be 0, 0, 0, so that would be black, but then we're going to say 0, and that means it's going to be transparent. If you make this mistake, you need to have the parentheses right next to RGBA because otherwise it won't register correctly. Now if I save that, we go back here and notice that we don't have any hover state because it's not, we're not telling it what to do when it hovers, but it's clear when it's not hovered on. So that's great. So now let's add a hover state. We'll go top dash nav, and then we're going to say nav dash menu, then A and the hover state. So when we're hovering over it, we want to give it a border bottom. So border bottom, and then we're going to say 1 pixel solid, and this time we're going to say white. We can do white or we can type FFF. Oh, here I have a typo. I have NAVE, so if something doesn't work, generally you'll have a typo. Let me save that again, and now we have our underlines will be there when we hover over our items. Now we have all our underlines working, but the social media icons on mobile, they're kind of smashed together, so we can fix that. If we go up to our social nav item, we can just add some padding. So we type padding, colon, We want the top and bottom to be 0, and then the right and left, let's do like 0.2 rem. And if we save that and go back to our browser, now we have a little bit of spacing. And you can make that be however you want. That's up to you. So now we need to add some media queries for our top nav, because when we go out like this, everything is smashed over to the center. So let's go ahead and fix that. So let's scroll down to the bottom of our CSS, and we need to use our media queries. So first, we'll start in the 600 pixel media query, go down to the bottom of it. Then at the end of the 600 pixels, we'll type navbar, and we're going to say line height 1.5 rem. And then underneath that, we're going to say nav menu, and we're going to give it some padding. So padding top 0, top and bottom 0, right and left 1 rem. And then we're going to give the nav item flex of 1, 1. This is basically flex grow and flex shrink in one line. And if we go back and we see that, now we notice that we don't have them overlapping, but they're not in the middle. So we need to make sure that they go in the middle. This is for this size screen. So we want to make sure that everything fits there. And then on the super large screens, we kind of want them to be centered in the middle. So let's go ahead and fix that. If we come down here to 920 pixels, this is our media query for super large screens. So we want to type in navbar, and we'll say justify content, and let's say center, or let's say space between. And then we're going to give it padding 2 rem on the top and bottom, and then 0 on the right and left. And then we're going to give it a line height of 1 rem. And if we save that, we go back. So now we have this just pushed down a little bit. So we have, that's that padding on the top and bottom. Gives it a little bit more space on a large desktop. Then we need to style the nav menu. Curly braces. Let's scroll this up to the center of the screen. We're going to say the width will be auto. And then we're going to justify the self end. And then the top nav itself will have the width be 100%. And if we save that and come back now, everything is spaced all the way across. So we have our nav bar looking good on mobile, and we fixed a lot of the things when we get up to 600 pixels, but there's still some things to fix. All of this runs together, so we can fix that in our 600 pixel media query. So we go here to our 600 pixels, and one of the things we want to do is have it be in the middle. So this nav bar, we can give it some padding. So we say padding, and then we're going to give it top and bottom no padding, and then the right and left, let's try something like 4 rem. And if we do that, and we go back, now we notice that this is centered. But we want to make sure that we have some spacing in here. So we're going to give the nav items some padding as well. So we'll give it padding, top and bottom 0, and then we'll just say like 0.2 rem. And then that just gives them some extra space around. So now we can select everything. Then if we move it farther out, notice that now we're pushed all the way over to the side. This is good because we want to have the space in the middle, but we want to have a little bit of padding on the edges. So let's go down to the 920. Then the same thing, instead of removing that padding, we'll go ahead and maybe make it 5 rem on the right and left, because remember this is top and bottom and then right and left. So if I save that, we can come back and this looks a lot better now. So that will move over and be flexible. And I think the spacing is fine, but if you wanted to have those spaced out just a little bit more, we can have these nav items. So we can just add .nav item, and then we can add some padding, and then the top and bottom 0, and we can say 0.5 rem, and then that'll space those apart more. So here now we have just a little bit more space in between, and you can tweak those to the way that you want them to look. So now we have our nav bar set. But the problem is if we click on Portfolio, it stays fixed. You can see the nav bar right here. We don't want that to happen. We want it to stay at the top. So we can do that with CSS. What we need to do is go back to our styles, and at the very top where we have our nav bar, and we said it has a position of fixed in the top nav. So right here, in my CSS, it's line 114. It may be different in yours. So after we say position fixed, we're going to add a comment. So we'll put /, colon, and we're going to say modern browsers. So this will be for modern browsers. And we'll say at supports. So does it support this CSS? And then we're going to say position sticky. So does it support position sticky? And if it does, we're going to say top nav, and then we'll say position sticky. So this will keep it up at the top, but we have to add one other line in case the user is using Safari. So we'll say position, then we'll say -WebKit -sticky, then colon, and we'll put a comment just to remind ourselves that this is for Safari. And now if we save and we go back to our scrolling, you see how it stays here? This is great. It stays sticky. But we want the background to change when we scroll down because I can't read it. So we can do that with a bit of JavaScript. So what we want to do is go back to our index.html. And then at the very bottom, remember we add JavaScript right at the end of the body. So we can put it anywhere down here. So right after end about, I'm going to type script and then enter. So what we want to do is have something happen when the window scrolls. So we're going to type window and then dot, and then we'll say on scroll. So this is an event. And then we're going to say equals function. So this means call a function. And then what function inside curly braces, we're going to call the scroll function. And then we'll put 2 parentheses and a semicolon. So what this says is call the function, scroll function, if the window scrolls, okay? So whenever the window scrolls, we're going to call this function. Well, what is this function? We need to define it. So we'll say function, and then scroll function, 2 parentheses, and then curly braces. So inside this, we'll say what to do. And it's okay not to understand everything about JavaScript. The point of this portfolio is not to learn the ins and outs of JavaScript, but I'll explain what each of these is doing. So we're going to have if, and then inside this is the conditional. So if this is true, we're going to say in the document. So the document is our web page. Inside the body, that's the body tag. So the document body, the scroll on the top. If the scroll on the top is greater than 20 pixels, right? Or the document. So this means or document element dot scroll top is greater than 20. So if either of those is true, then in curly braces, we're going to do something. So the way JavaScript works is it's an object. So it's hunting down the HTML. So it starts with the document. That's the whole thing. Then inside the body, does the body move? That's what we're checking. So then we're going to say document. So start in the document, get the element. Remember, element are all the tags. Element by ID. So remember what an ID is. That's like portfolio or our about page. And we're going to say, in quotes, top nav bar. We don't have this ID. We need to add it. And then we're going to say style. This is the CSS, the background. So style the background. Then we're going to say that equals now black. So 6 zeros is black. And then semicolon. So basically it says if we scroll, make the background black. Else, so if we're not scrolling down 2 pixels, we'll say document, get the element by ID. So grab the element, the tag by its ID. What ID? Well, we're going to say top nav bar. And then we're going to say what style. So style it. And what style? Background. And then we're going to say it equals none. So all this does is it checks Did we scroll down by 20 pixels? If we did, make the background of top nav bar black. If we did not scroll down, make it none. So we have to tell it what top nav bar is. So let's go back up to the top of the page. And here's our nav bar. So we're going to give this nav, so this is the nav bar right here, we're going to give it an ID. ID equals top nav bar. Remember, on the page, each ID has to be unique. So if I save this, at the very top, I scroll down, and my nav bar turns black. But you're going to notice something that we have to fix. You see here, this nav bar, the thickness of it, is knocking down our portfolio. We need to add some CSS to make this not happen. But so far, this is great. So when we go down, our nav bar is looking good. So if we click on portfolio, looks good, except now we can't see the portfolio. So we'll fix that with CSS as well. So as we build the web page, we start to notice new things, and then we'll fix them. So first, let's fix this white space here. To do that, we need to give the nav bar a height. And remember, let's start on the mobile. So here, it works here on mobile first, and we still have this problem. You can see it right here. So let's give the nav bar a height on mobile first, because that's the way our styles are working. So we're going to go all the way to nav bar at the very top, and we're going to give it a height. So we'll just say height, and let's say something like 6 rem. We want to make this a little bit bigger just to make sure we have plenty of space. So if we go back to our browser, that made it get bigger. I think that's okay, but that'll make it work fine. And then the next thing that happens is our image box, our hero image box. So we need to go to our hero box right here. And this is a weird trick in CSS. You can have a margin, but you can actually have a negative margin, and then it'll go backwards. So we're going to say margin. So we're going to say margin, top, and then we're going to say negative, what did I say, 6 or 5 rem? I think I said 5 rem. And then we'll save that. And then if we go back in our browser, I must have said 6 rem. So let's try that. So we'll say 6 rem. And then we go in our browser, and look, that's perfect. So up here, it's all clear. I scroll down, and then I don't see any of that space. Now we need to do it for the other sizes. So for this size, it should work fine because the height doesn't change. But remember, when we made our browser large, we wanted to have a little bit of padding on the bottom. So if we want the original look and you want some space down here, we can go down to the very bottom. So here we are, and here we can say height. And this is optional. It's working fine as is, but we could say this is 8 rem for the height of the nav bar. And if we look at that, that just gives us, remember we wanted that space in the top and the bottom, just a little bit bigger area. But now we have that problem again that we have to give that negative margin. So let's fix that in Visual Studio Code. So then we need to say hero box. We'll put it up here so it's in the same order. So on the big screen, we'll say margin, say negative 8 rem. Let's go to our HTML. We have 2 places we want to navigate to. We want to navigate to our portfolio, and we want to navigate to our About. So I'm going to add a class. So here we have our section ID portfolio and our class portfolio container. If I go inside these quotes and put a space, and I'm going to type a section. So this is a section. So I now have a new class. I could name this anything. I could name this bunny, but it's important to name something that makes sense. So we can say section stop, maybe something like that. Then I'm going to go down to the About page, and I'm also going to add the same thing, section stop. Right? That makes it clear that it's not that section. So we'll save that. And then we'll go to our styles, and we want to go up to the top here, and it could be anywhere that we think is important. I think I would go after the About styles before the Media Queries. So I'm going to say section-stop. And here we need to add a scroll margin. So we say scroll margin top, and we say 6 rem, because remember, mobile first. So let's see what that looks like. So now I'm going to make my browser skinny again. And if I click on Portfolio, now you see I can still see the portfolio. Here, because we added our scroll margin top 6 rem, it stops exactly there. If we want to have it just a little bit below so that we have a little bit more space, we can change this to 7, so 1 rem bigger than our nav bar. Then, if I click on Portfolio, I just have a little bit more space there. I think that looks a little bit nicer. It's up to you how you style yours. If I click on About, you'll notice we have all this extra space at the top. That's because the website doesn't have any space on the bottom to scroll down. We could fix that by adding some space in the bottom. It'll take care of itself when we add our footer. But if you're not going to add a footer and you don't want it to do that, we can go to our body of the HTML document at the very top here. And then we can add some padding to the bottom. And we can say something like 8 rem. Then if we go back to our browser and we click on About, now it snaps in and we can see that there. And you can see some of this padding on the bottom, but we're going to fix that with the footer. So if I click on Portfolio here at 600 pixels, it doesn't quite work. So let's fix that in the CSS. Let's go down to our media query. So all the way down at the bottom, remember we do mobile first. So we need our section stop, and we need our scroll margin top. And let's try 8 rem. Let's see what that looks like. Now, if I click on Portfolio, that's enough, but I could have it more. Let's click on About. About looks good, but I wanted just a little bit of space above that. Actually, maybe that looks fine. Let's see what it looks like with just an extra rem on the top there. Click on Portfolio. Yeah, that looks better, having just a little bit of space on the top there. Again, this is up to your personal preferences. Now let's make it big screen and click on About and click on Portfolio. That seems to work okay. I think it works fine on the big screen. Excellent. So now we have a navigation for our website. The last thing we need to do is add a footer. So let's go back to our HTML. And at the very bottom of our page, right before the JavaScript and after About, we're going to add another comment. So we'll say angle bracket, exclamation point, dash, dash, and then we'll say begin footer. And then we'll copy this and press enter. And then we'll call this end footer. And before we go farther, let's go ahead and commit our changes. So click on source control, and then we're going to say added about page or added about section. Click the check mark, and then we can sync those changes to our remote repository. So now I need to add the footer HTML code. Basically, we just want to add some navigation items. So if the user is at the bottom of the footer, they can still go places. So most of this is going to be exactly the same as above. So I'm going to type footer and then press enter. So this is a footer tag. So this is the container for the footer. And then I'm going to go all the way up to the top. And I'm going to copy our nav bar. So I'm going to copy this nav ID. Remember, I'm going to have to delete that later because I can only have one. And then I'm going to scroll down to, let's see, right here, just this nav. It's easier to highlight from the bottom. I'm going to press Command or Control C. I'm going to go all the way down to the footer. So here's our footer, and I'm going to paste that. The first thing I need to do is delete this ID because I can only have one ID of that name, and this is not the top nav. I'm also going to delete this class because it's not the top nav. If I just do that, and I go back to my browser, and I click on About, and I go all the way down to the bottom, just adding that is pretty good. But we can change that to be just a little bit better. It works fine on mobile, right? That looks good. The only thing we can do is just add a little space because this comes pretty close to the end, and maybe we want some spacing. All the links should work. So if we're here, I can click and I go all the way up to my portfolio. That's the idea. And I click down to go to About, and then I still have navigation icons down here.